The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is October 14th, 2025, and once again, we are going to look at the situation within Ukraine. So, let's begin. First of all, we are going to briefly mention the situation in the eastern Zaporozhye/Dnipropetrovsk direction. The Russians have continued their advances in this area during the last few days or so, though in this part of the front, things seem to be a bit elusive, mainly due to the fact that Poltavka is the main settlement here that is being contested. But otherwise, though, there hasn't really been a lot going on here. In addition, the majority of the village of Oleksivka is under Russian control, and also it appears that the Russians, in the direction of Dnipropetrovsk/Novopavlovka, have taken control over more of Ivanovka and have crossed another area along the Volcha River. And going to the east, the Russians have continued their advance into the Dnipropetrovsk region, though this area here was recently reclaimed by Ukrainians, but I honestly don't know how long this is going to hold, considering that they're basically surrounded on two sides. And then going further up north into the direction of Udachny, which is on the border with Dnipropetrovsk region, the Russians have broken through, like north, that is, and apparently they are contesting right now for the Pokrovsk coal mine. Now, according to Anatoly Radov, who is a Russian blogger, by the way, on Telegram, which is where he primarily posts, he, I guess, says or describes that half of this area here is half under Russian control. I repeat, Anatoly Radov, a pro-Russian blogger, has stated that half of the Pokrovsk coal mine is under Russian control. And it is not certain if there are many Ukrainian soldiers here left. And if this report were to be true, by the way, it would mean that the E50 road is wide open not just for physical Russian soldiers to take control of, but along with FPV drones as well. And it would also open the road to more skirmishes along the border with Dnipropetrovsk region. Now, going into the city of Pokrovsk, the Russians are continuing to advance on the western side of the city, and I think Lost Armor and Divjin have reported that western Pokrovsk is under Russian control, and there's even some reports circulating that the Russians have crossed the railway here and have started fighting for the industrial zone here. If this report were to be true, then it would be, as I said in one of my last videos or so, if not the last video I made, that they would basically be completely besieged in Pokrovsk. But otherwise, though, there are no updates within the city, like center and also from the south. Lost Armor has also reported that the majority of Novopavlovka is under Russian control, but we need to wait for more information before we can jump to said conclusions. And also, we got a new battle, MYRNOGRAD. The Battle of MYRNOGRAD started 1 to 2 days ago after the Russians reportedly took control over the villages of Balahan and Kozatsky. And they have reportedly entered MYRNOGRAD from the northeast. The Russians, as far as I know, are aiming to take these commie blocks here within the southern part of the city, and alongside that, also the rest of the southern part of MYRNOGRAD as well. If this whole area were to fall to Russia, alongside this hilly Terrakon here, then I'm not going to really be too surprised if the rest of MYRNOGRAD falls to Russia without that much of a problem. Ukrainians do not want to fight the Russians in the cities, and it wouldn't surprise me that if the Russians were to get deep enough within MYRNOGRAD, the Ukrainians would evacuate like almost immediately. Now, Going a little further up north to Rodensky, apparently the Russians, in some cases, like depending on what map you use, have taken control of a part of southeastern Rodensky. It is not 100% certain yet, at least according to Syriac, but according to Divjin and Lost Armor, they have apparently taken control over this part of Rodensky. If this were to fall, and combine that with this industrial zone here in Pokrovsk, then the Ukrainians will effectively, for the most part, have no way to escape not just Pokrovsk, but also MYRNOGRAD. And then going a little further up north, we have the mess, this confusing mess known as the Dobropila direction. Now, for those of you who do not know, I draw my own maps, which has now garnered over 40,000 views. And thank you to all those who have viewed the map, that is. And I have put every single settlement in this area here as a gray zone. But because we're using Syriac maps, like version of the Russo-Ukrainian War map, that is, we're going to play by his rules and describe what we see here on screen. Though I will say, before I get into it, that I don't personally agree with every decision he's made here in regard to the Dobropila direction. But I digress. Now let's break it down. So apparently the Russians have cleared the last of these areas here, which apparently had a lot of AFU troops, retaking control of Nikhanorivka and Dorozhine, and the Ukrainians have reportedly retaken control over the village of Nove Shakove, even though Anatoly Radov has disputed these claims. Valne is under Ukrainian control too, despite the fact that the Ukrainians themselves have not provided enough information to verify these claims, but Syriac here has done that. I don't know why he's done that, but that's what he did. However, though, on the plus side for the Russians, after they took control over, or retook control over the village of Volodymyrivka, the Russians have continued their assault into the key village of Shakove. Not Nove Shakove, but Shakove. So I guess you can call it Old Shakove, that is. It seems to me that the Russians are looking to complete the capture of Toretsky, Sofivka, and Shakove. The old one, that is. And if they're able to do so here, they will be able to establish a very strong, foothold, north of not just Dobropila, but also a, stronghold south of Druskovka, and also west of Konstantinovka. It will make any further offensives towards this area here a lot easier, especially towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. The Russians have continued contesting for these areas in the Konstantinovka direction, but not a lot. Siversk has seen some changes. Apparently, the Russians, according to Divjin and Deep State UA, have reportedly started fighting for the village of Jornivka. And if the Russians are able to take this, then we can pretty much consider every single part of the northern flank of Siversk as lost for the Ukrainians. And Siversk would effectively be in a cauldron. Yampol is still contested, though Russians apparently now control most of it. The Russians have also continued advancing south towards the village of Drobeshive and south towards Stavki, but not a lot here. And then going further north, we have an interesting development. Apparently, the Russians have retaken control over half of the village of Zarizove. And I wouldn't be too surprised if this village were to fall back to the Russians, because if it does, then we can safely assume that a push towards the village of Borova is underway. There's also a report that the village of Borisivka and Drivka is back under, or I think has been captured by the Russians, but we don't have enough evidence to back these claims, at least yet. Well, at least from Syriac's point of view. On my map, I already have this village under Russian control, but Syriac doesn't. So big difference there. But also, I think the Russians want to capture Zarizove to also be able to have enough breathing room to cross the Oska River into the village of Senkove, which in turn would give them a gateway into the rest of Kharkiv region. And speaking of which, let's talk about the key battlefield right now in the Kharkiv region, and that is the city of Kupiansk. The Russians have continued their advance into the city of Kupiansk, and as far as I know, every single commie block here, along with these further south and into the city center, are under Russian control. And according to Syriac, half of the commie blocks in the very southern tip of the city are now under Russian control, too, as well. So if we take all of this to consideration, along with this giant gray zone here, which apparently had some Ukrainians encircled, then we can safely assume that Western Kupiansk has fallen. And this, by the way, is the main part of the city. This is where most of the population lived before the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. And Kupiansk is also going to be used, by the way, as a springboard for future offensives into the Kharkiv region. There have also been some limited advances by the Russians north of the Kupiansk sector along the border, but not too much. And then in the town of Volchansk, the Russians have continued their advance into the western part of the town. And I think, according to Lost Armor in Divgen, the Russians have captured the majority of western Volchansk, which in turn leaves the southern part of the town still under Ukrainian control, but though not with much time left. If you ask me, folks, I think in the next few months from now, Western Volchansk is going to be captured, and I wouldn't be too surprised if the Ukrainians ultimately decide not to put up too much of a fight for these areas, because literally all of the strategic areas within Volchansk are now under Russian control, including the once citadels, like former citadels that is, or commie blocks that is within central Volchansk. And then you also have to take into consideration, as I said, with Kupiansk, because if Russians capture Kupiansk, then the North Group soldiers that are within this town are going to get the green light to finish off the rest of the Battle of Volchansk, so that they would then do an offensive into the northeastern corner of Kharkiv region with the goal of capturing Veliki Burlik and also attempting to go after the cities of Chuigiv and Izium, which is north of the Donbas region. There were some limited Ukrainian and Russian advances in the Sumy region, but I don't honestly think it's really worth reporting on, so I'll end it there. Anyway, folks, that's going to do it for today's video. So tell me in the comment section below what you think of the recent news in eastern Ukraine, and I'll see you all next time in the next 3 days. So I hope all of you have a great day, and I'll catch you all later. So take care, and goodbye.